All right, Michelle, welcome to the GTM Pack podcast. I'm so excited to have you on.
So happy to be here. Yeah, I'm ready.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I always think, LinkedIn, what an amazing tool this is, right? Because you and I think we've been like hanging out in the same circles on LinkedIn for some time now. I see you in the same comment threads as I'm in. And then, we finally got the opportunity to connect, let's say a couple months ago, and realize that we come from really similar backgrounds in terms of starting in sales and getting into product marketing. And I think we have a lot of the same vision and philosophies around sales enablement and how best to enable your sales team and sales assets, which obviously is something that we're pretty passionate about over here. So after our conversation, I just knew we had to have you on the GTM Pack podcast and share your thoughts with the world. So thanks again for connecting and for jumping on here today.
Oh yeah, I mean I've got a lot of thoughts, so I'm like, buckle up, I'm ready.
Awesome, awesome. Well, to start, for those that aren't familiar with you, maybe you can give us a little bit of sort of the quick background, who you are, how you started your career, how you got into product marketing, and then we can take it from there.
Sure, yeah. So maybe a fun fact about me. So in college, I studied hospitality. And what they don't tell you when you go to school for hospitality is that if you don't want to work in a hotel and you don't want to go into like real estate finance, it's kind of hard to find your way. So I was lucky enough right out of college to go into B2B tech sales, selling advertising to hotels at a company called Cvent. So had a really good time there. Never, expected to be in sales, but similar to your background, like I loved it. It was really fun. Sometimes I missed those commission checks, but regardless, about 3 years into it, I always knew I wanted to do marketing. I was like, okay, let me try marketing. At the time, I was the best sales rep on the floor. I wanted to move internally, but they were like, we need you on the sales floor. So no, I don't like to be told no. So I left and joined a couple marketing agencies. As anyone that's worked for or with an agency, you do a lot. You have to learn quickly. You have to work really, really hard to keep your clients. Otherwise, your job might be at risk. So I say that because I learned a lot and I learned quickly, and I kind of dipped my toes into a little bit of everything. But then Cvent had an opening for product marketing, which I didn't know anything about what product marketing was, like what it did in the organization, anything like that. But I really, really knew the product. And so in my head, I'm like, okay, I know the product. I sold the product. I demoed the product. I just learned all this stuff about marketing. This sounds like a really, really good fit for product marketing. And I fell in love with it. Just absolutely the strategy behind it, the creativity, working with so many different people, just fell in love with what now we know as, true product marketing. And I've done a lot of different things since. So all B2B tech. I love technology. I'm such a nerd when it comes to like SaaS and, what you can do with cool new tools. So I've had a lot of fun, a lot of really cool experiences going through product marketing in that way.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think your background is so awesome in terms of sales, but then I didn't actually know about the agency thing. I've always thought that an agency is like a fast track, like boot camp for learning marketing. Because I was similar. I was working at a influencer marketing tech company doing sales, and luckily I got the opportunity to then take on the product marketing role within that company. But a lot of our customers were agencies. And at a point in time, knowing that I wanted to dip my toes into marketing, I was like, it would be really cool to join an agency. I know it's a rough life. Like, you're always sort of hair on fire trying to answer to clients' needs. But at the same time, it really pulls you through, puts you through the ringer in terms of understanding all the different aspects of marketing. And then there's also the sales side of it, right? You got to keep those customers happy and get them to increase their work with you and all that. And then I think you hit on a really interesting point. I think we'll talk about sort of the transition from sales to product marketing, but I think that like salesperson that goes deep into the product, that knows the product inside and out, that was kind of me at my role as well. I think those folks make amazing product marketers. So no wonder you became such an amazing product marketer. But as I mentioned, in terms of that transition from sales to product marketing, personally, I always think that this is my superpower, right? Like, especially being a sales enablement focused product marketer, having carried a bag, having, a quota in the past, knowing what it's like to be in the shoes of the sales rep and having a little bit of that cred, right? goes a long way. I'm curious, your thoughts on this. Do you also agree that it's like a superpower for a product marketer? And personally for you, how has it impacted the way that you've approached product marketing and your ability to perform as a product marketer?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely for sure. It's funny. I often get asked, it's hard to show the ROI of product marketing, right? Like what KPIs do you hold and how do you really contribute to the business? And my philosophy has always been if we're not hitting our sales numbers, I'm doing something wrong. And I think part of that comes from I joke, but it's kind of true. Like you can take the girl out of sales, but you can't take sales out of the girl. And I think that's very true because at the core of what we do, again, it's how do we talk about ourselves in the market? How do customers know about us? How do we retain like all of those things we have a hand in ultimately comes down to is the business making money, right? So again, maybe controversial in terms of how I think about it, but 100% I would hands down I would say that's my superpower. If nothing else, if you're not like you said have a little bit of credibility, but if you can't quite figure out what sales wants or why they're asking for things or how to make sure that they're successful, it can be a little bit of a learning curve. It can be a little bit harder to figure that out sometimes. But when it comes to, true stakeholder management, you have a sales leader in your corner as one of your cheerleaders. Like they will support you in so many amazing ways also across the organization. So 100% for me, like definitely a superpower. And I'm very, very fortunate to have started there and kind of pulling that in now. Cause then the things that I get obsessed about, like personally, I could live in sales assets and pitch decks. Like if that, my heaven is like pitch decks, which, I'm not sure everyone would say that. So it's been great for me. Cause again, you can see the credibility that you build, the reputation that you build, the really confidence that you get within the organization by really honing in on sales and then helping them succeed is just like the best feeling. Like when a sales rep comes to you and says, "Hey, I won this deal or got this call or whatever because of something you did," like that's the best feeling. So
Yeah, it's such an important point actually that you made there in terms of like I always think about the reason why it's the superpower is the credibility, sort of the empathy that you have for the salesperson. But you're also right, like growing up in sales, you're ingrained in knowing that like in the end of the day, no matter how much work you do or how much assets you create, it's all about winning business, right? And that's ingrained in you as a salesperson. And if you can bring that over to the marketing, the product marketing side, it's such a superpower because now you're completely aligned with your sales leadership. So it's a really, really important point. Now, as product marketers, we know that salespeople are constantly sort of asking for those last minute requests, right? And especially when it comes to sales assets, it's, do we have a one pager on this or do we have a case study on that, right? Um, I think, as folks that were in that role before, we maybe understand it a little bit better. We have a little bit more empathy to the sense of urgency that sales people feel at those times, maybe then more than others. But there's always the need to try and set some sort of expectations, boundaries. We can only do so much. And also to try and transition things from being reactive to being more proactive, right? And I'm curious, you know, to get your viewpoint on how do you do that, right? As somebody that, again, has sat on the other side of the table and understands that mindset, what secrets do you have for us, right? On how we can speak to sales in a way that creates some common ground, right? In terms of creating those expectations and those boundaries.
yeah. So maybe a simplified response to that, but I always ask why. Like why do you need this? What's the deal? What's it worth? Like, do you feel like there's a gap? Does something else work? I ask why because that really gives you the core goal of what they're trying to achieve with what their ask is, right? So is there something that already exists that you can make a quick tweak to and that's good enough? Or is this like a longer term, more intense project that requires a little bit more effort? And I think when you set those boundaries, you're showing that their needs matter, that you really care what they're saying, but it's not a no, I'm not going to do this. It's a no, not right now. And what does that look like here? What can I do for you in this moment? Whether again, it's something existing that you can tweak, or maybe they haven't thought about using it. They forgot some collateral existed, right? How can you help them in that moment? And then what does the long term look like? And the other thing that I like to do, and I'm a big visual person, so I have like diagrams and to-do lists and whatever, but I have kind of like a quadrant of my key projects and like what's urgent and what's important versus what's not urgent, what's not important, and kind of everywhere in between. And so if it gets to the point where, sales is really upset, or, leadership really wants, I don't know, a new white paper on something, whatever it might be, and you show this list to them of other projects you're working on, you say, okay, I can prioritize, but where do other things fall? And I think just that open, honest conversation, like you mentioned, like bringing in the empathy, knowing what they're dealing with. I mean, they have numbers to hit at the end of the day. Like, who wouldn't be motivated or, passionate to get what they need to think, or think to get what they think they need to hit that, right? So knowing that, and really where is the ask coming from? So how you can best support them, because sometimes it isn't new collateral, right? Or, there's something that exists that can really work well. So I think that's a good balance of not no, but not right now is really the conversation I like to have.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And yeah, I mean, we all know how it feels, those that have been in sales. Like, it does feel like life and death, right? Like, when you have that deal on the line and you
Oh,
feel like maybe it's a competitor that has suddenly come up in the conversation, and you're like, I need something to show. It feels like that commission check, as you mentioned, which is the livelihood of salespeople, is at risk, right? And it feels life and death. So having some empathy for that feeling that they have, but also being able to articulate like what your priorities are, and trying to find that short-term solution, but also building that longer term path, I think is a really sound approach. I'm curious, that quadrant sounds like an awesome tool
love it.
for these sort of conversations. Is that something that you show only in the moment, or do you show that ahead of time, like at, let's say, the beginning of the quarter, and say, hey, just to set expectations, here's this quadrant, and then you bring it back in when
Yeah.
the sales folks sort of are pushing?
Yeah, definitely the latter. I like to be
Yeah,
really transparent with what I'm working on for the quarter. So, I mean, from the CEO down, just so everyone's aware, like, what are the priorities? What are those big things that I'm working on? So that can always be tweaked. And if, there's questions, they can always go back to it themselves as well. So I do try and, keep that consistent and keep that source of truth, just even for my own sanity, right? Like, Asana can only do so much for me when it
yeah.
comes to like, what am I strategically working on for that quarter? Um, and I think, like you were talking about too, like there's something to be said for just like talking a sales rep through it, kind of not necessarily off the ledge, right? But like, how can you empower the salesperson to talk about the problem to the prospect, to the customer, in a way that makes sense too, right? So there's, assets are awesome when done correctly, and I know we'll talk about that a little bit more. But there's also something, I think, to be said of being that kind of, I don't know, therapist, I guess, right? To talk them through what's the scenario, why do you need this, and like what can be said or done, to really support even just like a conversational way as well. So I think, I don't know, there's some hidden gems, and sometimes we forget that, like, talking someone through that, or being there for that kind of support, is like really underrated, I think, too.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah, I think the biggest mistake that product marketers can make is just saying no, right? Nope, this is not a priority. Like, I'm not going to do that, right? And I have seen, I have to say, there's a lot of discussions on LinkedIn about that relationship between sales and product marketing, and I've seen some product marketers say, I just say no, right? And I think there's a middle ground here, right? Like, definitely, I totally get the point of protecting your time, protecting your priorities, but at the same time, as you said, sometimes it's just about having a conversation, understanding the why behind it, and then providing some other form of delivering on that why, whether it be an existing asset that might not be perfect, but it's a good starting point, and or just a conversation and some bullet points, or some talk tracks that they can use, and then setting the foundation for like building what they're asking for in the future. I think that is the best approach for sure. Um, let's talk about sales assets. I think we're both super passionate about the topic. And I'm curious, from your viewpoint, right, as somebody that's been on both sides, what does the perfect sales asset look like? What are the attributes of a perfect sales asset? And I always hear this sort of complaint that, like, marketing delivers something that they think the sales team wants, but it isn't what the sales team wants. And this is what sales, I'm curious, what does that gap look like to you? Like, what is that? What is marketing delivering that, and how is it different from what sales truly needs? And how do you bridge that gap, right? I think is an interesting thing to unpack with you.
A lot. Okay, yeah. Here's where we have like the long conversation. So, first of all, maybe level setting to me. Why do sales assets exist? And you're really trying to remove friction in the buying or upsell process, right? To get someone to purchase something faster, easier, et cetera. I think there's an interesting world we're living in where I think more and more people don't necessarily want to talk to sales. So I think assets are going to be more needed, but they have to be good. Like they have to be properly written to the right person to reduce that friction, right? Um, Back to our point earlier of why sales coming from sales is kind of our superpower. It's because you know what the customers are thinking. You've heard it firsthand. What are those challenges? What are the objections? Why are those objections a real thing? Like when you think about reducing those friction points, right? You need to know those things. What really are the challenges in the customer's words? What are the objections about? Why are they having those objections? So that you have the information you need to make good sales assets to overcome those friction points, right? And so I think that's a really key part of thinking about before you even start an asset or just kind of do what sales is asking, to have that in mind. I think coming from sales, it's like very top of mind for that, building those actual assets. When it comes to misalignment, a lot of times I see there's two different goals, right? And I've done product marketing under product and under marketing, so there's different kind of mindset there too. But when it comes to marketing, a lot of companies are driven by MQL. So when it comes to what assets are being created or what deliverables are being created, it's oftentimes something maybe bigger, longer form content that's gated. Now, gated and
Yeah.
ungated is probably a whole nother conversation, but because their goals are MQLs, they maybe focus more on ebooks and white papers and webinars, things like that, to drive those leads versus the sales assets. Now, I think this is a core area where product marketing can come in to help, as long as product marketing is not held to MQL goals, which I've heard more and more recently. Personally, I think that's the wrong path, but that's my opinion. And I say that because again, for me, at the end of the day, if sales isn't hitting their numbers, I'm doing something wrong. So I say that because I think that misalignment happens because of differences in goals, and CMO having different goals than the head of sales, which of course is going to happen in an organization. But how do you, like you said, how do you bridge that gap? So one of the things I like to think about is, again, so you think about why the assets you're building, what do you put in those assets, and we'll talk about, I think later, like what a good asset looks like, or where we're going. But I think it has to fit into that larger conversation, that larger strategy of like, how do you reduce friction? And then why are you doing this? So if you are a product marketer and you're under marketing, right? And your team overall is in charge of MQLs. Okay, well, what if those leads don't lead to conversions? What if sales isn't having any calls based on those leads, right? You don't want to get stuck with that problem. So that's why you really need to be top of mind and have that kind of alignment with, hey, at the end of the day, we need to get leads that convert. And that's where the product marketer comes in with really good sales assets to figure out what asset needs to be sent to the prospect and when. So
Yeah.
a lot of things that can come from just that conversation of alignment, I think.
Yeah, I think you and I are totally in agreement on this. Like, I think our definition of sales assets is 100% the same, right? It's thinking about the questions and objections that buyers have in the sales process, and giving the sales team the tools, the information, and the tools they need to remove those objections and answer those questions to remove friction in the sales process. And you highlighted something that I actually had never thought about, which is that MQL misalignment, right? I think you're totally right. Like, if a marketing team is measured by MQLs, then why, in their mind, why would they be spending time reducing friction that comes after that, right?
Yeah.
Because they've hit their goal. So I've always been a big believer in the fact that marketing and sales should share at least one of their goals, and that clearly the clearest one is revenue, right? It's
Pipeline.
the ability to generate revenue for the business. If that is the case, there's more alignment, and I think now it makes sense for the marketer to think about how they can reduce that friction and create those assets to do so. So it's you just connected some dots for me. That's a really great insight, I think, for people to think about. We were talking about the future of sales assets, right, and sales enablement in general, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, I think, with buyers not wanting to talk to sales and so on. But I'm curious, in that world, right, where buyers, I like to say we're in a remote selling world where asynchronous selling becomes more important than ever, and that's both because of just a remote work environment, right, and all the tools and all the habits that we've formed around that. But also, as you said, there's uh, I think buyers don't want to be pressured anymore. They don't want to. They want to kind of stand on their own feet, make their own decisions, and sort of manage their own process. So in this world, right, how do sales assets evolve? And also, how does sales enablement evolve, right, to provide those types of assets to both the seller and the buyer? I'm curious to get your take on that.
So I love the world we live in. I test out a lot of tools and AI and things. I mean, maybe I should take a step back. I am a solo and founding product marketer on a marketing team of two, right? So I have to find ways to be more efficient, to scale certain things, to do more with less. And I know that's maybe a silly phrase, but it's true because the pressure of a startup can be a lot, but there are so many tools that can support people with sales enablement, with better assets, things like that. So I do think we're at a really pivotal point, and it's one of those times like get on the bandwagon or buckle up, because I think there's some turbulence ahead if you're not smart about the tools you're using and how to do it. For example, if you think about like marketing in general, and how many of those like buyer journey diagrams have you seen online, they go from a website to this to that, this buyer journey, and how do you send them an email at a certain time or an SMS or whatever it might be for marketing, right? I think that will become very true for assets of the pre-sales cycle. So not just like where they're engaging, but more of like the assets. So they've, clicked on this thing on your website, or they talked to someone and then downloaded something, or checked out your webinar on demand, something like that. I think we'll get to the point where we're sending certain assets at certain times based on that customer journey. So you have like kind of a general buying journey, but within that, how do you plug in the right assets at the right time to the right person, right? So that's one piece of it. Two, I think we're going to get really, really, really good with personalization. So what do I mean by that? I think we're going to be able to pull in more things like behavioral data. Like I said, what did they click on? What did they download? What did they view? With a lot of their personal information. Who are they? What company are they from? What vertical are they in? What is their title? And start personalizing the asset based on that. And I think, for example, Asset Mule does a really, really good job being able to customize things, personalize things really modularly, like really quickly, so that, when you have to pull something together for a different industry, retail versus media versus, whatever, it's a lot easier to do that than it used to, where you literally have to basically start from scratch and rewrite things. And this is more like plug and play. And I think that's only going to get better in terms of personalization, so that potentially get to the point where we can do real time. Again, the person's name, title, their company, and they're going to get served the asset automatically in real time based on what they're engaging with and where. So I think we're in a really cool area where if you have the right information, the right groundwork to build these assets, again, the pain points, the friction points, the objections that you're ready to overcome, you have this information and kind of like a repository that you can pull from. And then we'll start customizing, personalizing in real time. And it's going to be, I hope, really, really cool. Now, that being said, I'm not sure I can think of a company, B2C or B2B, that's really done true, like good real-time personalization. So maybe that's up for debate, but there's really cool tools that are doing more of this. And I think we're getting more of these data points to pull into something like an asset. For example, I don't know if you've heard of RB2B, where they can pull like, everyone knows.
Yep.
And this is blowing my mind. I'm like, you get the person's LinkedIn, what pages are they visiting, what blog posts, whatever. And if I know that they either read this blog post, I'm like, here's 3 more that are interesting, or, they attended metarouter.com for retail, right? Here's a retail asset. Like, there's so many cool data points that we can pull in to give them the right asset with the right information based on who they are and what they're looking for. So I think it's just a really, really exciting time. I think the second thing I would say is pulling more media into assets. So, I mean, I used to do, assets in like PowerPoint, like who even talks about PowerPoint anymore? But I would do assets in PowerPoint. It would take me forever. I would print it out as a 2-pager and it would go to a conference and like sit there on a table, right? I think we're getting to a really cool point where that's getting more interactive. So like, Asset Mule's done pulling in videos and demos from like Novatic and Storylane, like that stuff blows my mind. They're getting a preview of the document before you actually have to click into it and look at it. Cause it's one thing to open and read an email. It's another thing to actually click on something in it. Right. So I think the way that that's getting more interactive and more interesting and more media forward is like really, really cool because you're combining the things you want to say within an asset with the things you want them to read. So I think that's, again, we're just at such a cool point. There's so many great new tools to make this more interesting and more engaging. And then I think so that's assets, right? So from a sales enablement perspective, I think it's going to get really more interesting as well for how we support sales in those moments. I don't know. Have you ever heard of a company called Speckit before?
It
Maybe.
sounds familiar. I'm not, but I'm not sure I know it intimately.
Okay, yeah. This is a fun story. It's like a category
Yeah.
creation story, which again is probably another conversation. But so Speckit is a company who, when they were first founded, tried to coin this category of just-in-time learning,
Hmm.
um, which was interesting because it made sense, but it's really internal for sales enablement. So if you have a bunch of documents, assets in a content management system, but you want to surface the right assets to sales at the right time, given what the prospects, et cetera, are going through, or they need to overcome an objection, or like you said, they need competitive intelligence. Like the just-in-time learning would give them those assets they need when they needed it. Ended up, rebranding into a internal sales
Hmm.
enablement tool, which made more sense in the category they were working in, but a really good idea of this just-in-time learning, right? Because
Yeah.
I do think we'll get there. Of how not only are you getting the right assets to the right people, but how you're making sure sales is enabled with those assets or with that information, one, to learn for themselves, and then two, to again get the right stuff to the right people. So definitely a pivotal point. I think, again, if you're not using the right tools and not kind of learning right now, you're going to get left behind. I mean, there's another tool, personality.ai,
Hmm.
that can personalize website pages, again, with, if I think it's just a name, title, and homepage, like a web page. So like I'm, Sarah Smith, e-commerce manager at Amazon, right? Put that in the web page, auto personalizes for you within like seconds. Like there's
Wow.
such cool tools out there that and Asset Mule is one of them. I mean, I would, unbiased, I know, I'm not being paid to say this, but like, but truly, I mean, you guys are changing the game for sales assets that actually work. Again, the engagement, the way you can personalize it. Like I could literally have my sales team create one if they wanted to, and back to the, bandwidth and protecting your boundaries, things like that. If you can eventually enable sales to like make their own assets with information that you have pre-populated and put into the tool, like that's kind of the best of both worlds. And so yeah, I clearly get excited about this, so I'm like, I need to stop talking now, but it's really cool stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and by the way, like one of the things that I'm actually most excited about with AI, a lot of people I think talk about streamlining workflows and like doing things more quickly and with less resources and so on. I think the personalization piece is really, really interesting because when I was a salesperson, I always thought the thing that I did differently that made me a top performer, perhaps, was the fact that I really personalized the demos and all my emails were very personalized. And in my mind, I always tried to have this viewpoint that I wanted the customer to feel like they were my only customer, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like AI has the ability to help us do that at scale for the first time, right? Like the challenge that I always had was to do that level of personalization and make each buyer feel that way. I kind of hit a cap at some point on how many customers I could do that for. So it would be doing that for your best and biggest deals and maybe not so much for your medium sized or smaller deals, right? But with AI and these tools, and that is our vision for Asset Mule as well, right? Is to add more and more of these elements into it. Now you can actually do that for all of your prospects, which is really, really cool. One last thing I wanted to ask you. You clearly know your tools, right? You going out there, you're rolling up your sleeves, you're trying all these different things. One thing I've seen you do on LinkedIn that I'm really, really enjoying is these product marketing hacks that you're publishing. And I saw a recent one that was AI focused. I've seen others that have other angles. I'm curious, like, where did that come from? Maybe for those that haven't seen it, tell us a little bit about uh, what inspired you to do it and what it is. And then maybe, I know you shared already a couple of tools that you're using and so on, but like maybe share one of your favorite recent ones that you shared for folks here.
Oh man, yeah. I'm very involved in the Product Marketing Alliance, and a couple colleagues reached out asking for hacks, kind of generally for a presentation for one of the in-person summits, and I gave them a couple. For me, it was Gong. I'm obsessed with Gong. It's like, I don't know, the other man, because I'm on it so much. I don't know. I joke with my husband. It's fine. But it's like I kind of got this idea of, oh my gosh, it's not just me that has these ideas. Like, so many product marketers have these hacks or need them. Again, like, solo and founding product marketer, I need all the help I can get. And so my love of kind of tech and trying things out, plus my need to be more effective with my time, kind of married into this fun series, which again basically pushes me to try new tools and try different use cases to do more with less, really. So it's been a lot of fun. I never expected, kind of the reaction that I did, but I'm glad it's helpful so far. And really, again, it's cool new tools to do cool things with product marketing. In terms of gosh, a recent or a favorite, I mean, I like them all for different reasons. It really depends on what you're trying to do for product marketing. One that I'm just loving just because it's so easy for me. So last year, I did a lot of groundwork for Meta Router building marketing. Like, we had no blog posts, no webinars, no
Mhm.
content. I'm taking all of our webinar content that we produced last year, putting it into a tool called Opus Clip. Um,
Yeah.
it literally, my mind is blown. It's one click and it will parse out all of your webinar content into like 30 to 90-second pieces and prioritize it by how viral it can go. And
Wow.
it gives you the speech, like the transcript, like the subtitles or whatever. Auto generates that too. So I literally, here's the link to the webinar from YouTube, put it in one click. I have like 10 plus clips and all the subtitles I can use for social and things like that. So I mean, talk about repurposing content in a really cool way. And if I wanted to put that into something like an asset mule document, I could pull that in too. And I just think that video, that ease of creating those video clips and what you can do with them for social, for assets, for email, whatever you want to put it into, has just been, I mean, so fun for me. Video editing's like a side passion of mine. And now I'm just like, oh, okay, this is like too easy. So maybe that's one that just recently I've been having a lot of fun with. But yeah, it totally depends on what you're trying to do. I think product marketers have to do so much, and so finding
Yeah.
these and ways to kind of make your lives easier has been really fun.
Yeah. I was going to say that I think product marketers are like perfect for this because there's a lot of solo product marketers, and even when they're not a solo product marketer, they're definitely under resourced compared to the teams that they're supporting, right? And the number of teams that they're supporting, right? We talk about the ratio between product marketer and salesperson, but then you've also got the CS team that you're supporting, and you've got the broader marketing team, and then you've got the product team, right? So um, it's almost like product marketers are forced to find solutions and these tools that allow you to do much more with less, as you said, are really powerful for product marketers. So it sounds like you're the person to go to. I'm going to be pinging you myself whenever I run into one of these challenges. But for folks that want to follow you and maybe want to check out those product marketing hacks and hear what you have to say about these different tools that you're discovering, what's the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn. All there all the time. I think there's only one Michele Nieberding. But if not, bright yellow jacket, you'll know.
Yeah, we'll link to your LinkedIn profile on this as well, so they'll be able to find you. But Michelle, this has been so fun. Like again, being able to connect with somebody that has gone through the sales to product marketing transition, that has the vision for the future of sales enablement and buyer enablement that we do here as well, and that's just excited about the future and the tools that are starting to come to market. It's always a fun conversation. So really appreciate the time and wishing you a great day over there.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having me. This has been fun. Appreciate it.